Good morning, beloved. God is slow to anger. The same can, however, not be said about us as human beings. There are different ways in which we choose to handle anger. We may try to repress or hold it back while fuming on the inside, or we may try to suppress it, holding it down while being bitter and resentful. Neither repression or suppression is helpful. And so this raises the question, how should we deal with anger? Paul in Ephesians 4 verse 26 teaches us that there is room for expression. Our expression of anger must take place while bearing in mind the damage that we can do to others, and of course, as the verse states, the possibility of sinning in anger. Ephesians 4:26 says, "Be angry and do not sin, and do not let the sun go down on your anger." It's actually a command that Paul gives the Ephesians to be angry, but with a qualification: do not sin. And so we have to ask, when does anger lead to sin? Anger leads to sin when it's self-defensive or self-serving, when it is reactionary or resentful to what is done to oneself. Anger that is selfish and vindictive is sinful and should not be condoned by believers. However, anger that is based on love for God and concern for others and is unselfish may be expressed. Paul, of course, adds a rider to permitted and expressed anger. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. It is possible for righteous anger to degenerate to resentment, bitterness, self-pity, self-righteousness. And therefore Paul admonishes not to give an opportunity to the devil by allowing anger to go beyond sunset. And so we can deal with anger by expression. But we can also deal with anger by confession. We must be honest in our expression or our admission of our anger, firstly to God, and there is no substitute for anger or aggrieved people to take time to talk to the Lord honestly about their hurt and frustrations and feelings. It is also important to admit concern, actions or reactions that were vindictive and harsh. It is also important that after confession to the Lord, to approach the offended or offending party courteously and with concern, with the aim to mend the relationship. In approach, one should be careful not to be accusatory. Avoid beginning with you, rather start with I, pointing the finger at self. This will certainly make allowance for the person approached to be responsive. As believers, we must approach anger with macrothumia, slowness to anger. When Peter had conflict with someone, he asked the Lord how many times he needed to forgive an offender. In Matthew 18:21 to 22, the Lord responded 70 times 7. And this is, I believe, 70 times 7 in the context of a day, remembering Ephesians 4:26 that says, "Don't let the sun go down on your anger." The Lord then told him the parable in Matthew 18 verses 23 to 35. A man who owed a great debt asked for macrothumia, slowness to anger, patience, in verse 26. The master went further and forgave him his large debt in verse 27. A second man who owed him less than he owed the king asked for macrothumia. He refused and had the man locked up. In application, the Lord reminds us that if we have any idea of God's slowness to anger, macrothumia, we will in haste show others slowness to anger. We must also remember it is characteristic of love to be patient. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 4, Paul always remembered God's loving patience. 1 Timothy 1 verse 16, and he always showed the same patience in ministry. Ephesians 4 verses 2 to 3, 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 2. As believers living in a world around us with frustrations, we have ample opportunity to grow the fruit of the Spirit, allowing patience to blossom and grow. Paul wrote to the Colossians in chapter 3, verses 12 and 13, put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you. So you must also forgive. Yes, anger is real, but we should deal with anger as the fruit of the Spirit instructs us to. Have a blessed day. Amen.